You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron. Now here's your host, Ethan Haristadoulou.
What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to the Greeks Gridiron. I am Ethan Haristadoulou, and today, with the new league year officially underway as of just a few hours ago, I thought it would be fun to sit down and talk some way too early biggest winners out of this year's free agency. Obviously, a lot of moves becoming official today. In the last couple of days, we've been hearing deals be agreed upon and have not become official until today, but there's plenty to discuss, and I wanted to dive in on it all. So I invite you all to comment down below. I want to hear your thoughts and opinions on who I think are winners. Who do you think are maybe some people I left off this list, whether it's players and or teams? I have a little mix of both here. Let me hear what you all think. But we'll start out. I have, I think, 8 altogether, 8 different people and or teams I'm going to discuss here. And the first one that I have on the list, we'll start off with the AFC South darlings now, the Houston Texans, coming in with a serious need to upgrade their defense in this offseason, and only a couple of key losses from 2023 going through this free agency period. I think that you have yourselves a much more appealing Texans team that is gearing up to potentially be the front runners of the AFC South going forward. The way I look at it right now, the Jaguars might be in a little bit of a flux. We'll kind of see what happens with them, ultimately burning out the end of last season. They've kind of won and lost some players through this free agency here. Colts have focused heavily on retaining people. The Titans kind of in a bit of a reset season. So right now, I would say, based off the Texans' performance last year and just all things considered, they're probably the front runners. And when you look at some of the big signings they had, edge rusher Danielle Hunter, this one caught me way off guard because I was kind of expecting the attempt to try to bring back Jonathan Greenard, but ultimately they said goodbye to him. He went to Minnesota, and then they went and took Minnesota's guy. 2-year, $49 million deal, can be worth up to, I believe, 51 with incentives. This is a legit threat, a guy that offenses need to game plan against, playing alongside your young man, Will Anderson Jr. This is a phenomenal pairing, in my opinion, and it's about as good as you possibly could have gotten for the Houston Texans here. You have a guy like Hunter, 87.5 career sacks, 108 tackles for loss, 170 pressures since 2018. I mean, the guy's an absolute unit off the edge, and he's solid whether it comes to rushing the passer or even working and setting the edges during the run. So this is a really great pickup here. They also went and got Azeez Al-Shaair on a 3-year, $34 million deal. He reunites with D'Amico Ryans from his time in San Francisco. He had a career best 163 tackles last year. And you got more like under the radar signing, but a clear effort to potentially do like high risk, high reward in signing Jeff Okudah, the cornerback here, to work on a secondary that needed a little bit of help this past season. So a gamble on a first round talent there. You went and traded for running back Joe Mixon as well after losing Devin Singletary in free agency. You went and re-signed Dalton Schultz. You went and kept your stud kicker Kaimi Fairbairn. I mean, I've got to say, from top to bottom, what I've seen from the Texans so far this offseason, they've done a fantastic job trying to build off of what was a phenomenal rookie campaign for C.J. Stroud. I mean, if you're sitting here thinking Houston Texans might be the favorite in the AFC South, I think I'd have to agree with you right now. And this is coming from somebody who grew up rooting for the Colts. Second person I'm going to talk about now, we're going to switch from team focus and look at a specific player, and that is going to be quarterback Kirk Cousins himself, signing with the Atlanta Falcons on a 4-year, $180 million deal. $100 million of that is guaranteed, and in my opinion, this was more than anticipated. This is what I was calling for and hammering for. I felt like this was the best place for Kirk Cousins to end up, and I was pumped to see him land here. This really is about, obviously, Kirk Cousins getting money that I think is more than deserved. A lot of people, for whatever the reason may be, like to, throw dirt on Kirk Cousins. And, I understand the record in primetime and all that, yada, yada, yada. However, there has been an issue for Kirk Cousins while he's been in Minnesota, and it hasn't been Kirk Cousins. It's been a defense that has not been great. So you have now Kirk Cousins going to a situation where you have a defense that's trending in the positive direction, coupled with an offense that is littered, like absolutely littered, with young and up-and-coming talent. Kyle Pitts, Drake London, Bijan Robinson. Atlanta also just went ahead and signed Darnell Mooney, who was a 1,000-yard receiver just a couple of years ago. He has a career average of 12.2 yards per reception, and he was third in separation in man coverage last season, getting open a whopping 42% of routes run against man coverage. Like, there is so much to be excited about with this Atlanta offense, whether it's from the addition of Kirk Cousins to now Kirk Cousins being the guy who's going to be wheeling and dealing to some of these guys that have so much untapped potential, in my opinion. The Falcons offense just got immediately and significantly better with the signing here. And again, I know there were people with their hearts set on Justin Fields being from the Atlanta area. I get it. I understand some of the disappointment here, but I truly think in terms of winning now as opposed to hoping for the best down the road, if you want to win this next season, Kirk Cousins probably gives you that best opportunity there, and it's clear the Falcons saw that as well. I do think that paired with that defense, as I mentioned earlier, you have a legitimate chance to do so. They do got to bring back Calais Campbell, and I think they should consider bringing back Bud Dupree as well over the next few days, but overall, I think that this move, Cousins making a boatload of money, going into a situation indoors at that as well, gives you a legitimate shot to contend in the NFC South that is very much up in the air right now. Third team I'm going to talk about now is going to be the Washington Commanders. And I've got to say this. They have done a really good job in retooling this roster and doing so without necessarily dumping ungodly sums of money and contracts onto people here. When you look at some of the notable signings that they're making, there isn't really a single person here that I look at their contract and go, that's pretty unreasonable for the player that they're getting there. Linebacker Frankie Louvu, 3-year, $36 million deal, so you're looking at about $12 million per year on average annual value. 136 tackles, 12.5 sacks, and 19 TFLs in the last 2 seasons for Carolina. He came up strong on that defense the last couple of years. They went and got edge rusher Dorrance Armstrong, who is somebody that I was talking about in the lead up to free agency here as kind of a low-key name that wasn't really getting thrown around because I feel like there were bigger names that were potentially going to be out there. But with 16 sacks, 17 tackles for a loss, and 71 pressures over the last 2 years in Dallas, he's one of those guys that didn't quite get the recognition because he's playing with guys like Lawrence and Parsons taking up all the conversation with how effective they are as pass rushers there. But I do think Dorrance Armstrong, $15 million per year, not a terrible number considering just how high the number can actually get for premier edge rushing talent. You also have running back Austin Eckler, a 2-year, basically $11.5 million deal, a 2022 Offensive Player of the Year, someone who has 4,259 yards and 44 total touchdowns over the last 3 seasons in LA. I know last season, a little bit of a down year, dealt with some injuries, but Austin Eckler, and I have pounded the table about this for years, has been a top 3 running back in the NFL, all things considered. What he can do in the pass and what he can do as a runner as well. This guy is as multifaceted as they come at the running back position here, and it's kind of crazy to me that he was not more sought after. And maybe it had to do with just some of the injuries he dealt with this year, but if Austin Eckler was a free agent last year, he's definitely getting those same contracts that Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs are all currently being handed right now. And in my opinion, Austin Eckler does have a higher potential upside than pretty much all of those guys because of the production that he can do, again, both as a runner and a receiver. Austin Eckler, I am a massive fan of, and for whatever reason, people just don't want to give him his recognition, and I guess the Commanders will take that and be able to pay him less than I personally think he's worth. Then you have a guy like safety Jeremy Chin, 1-year, $4 million deal. A couple of years ago, this is a guy that a lot of people looked at as like an ascending safety in the NFL who, in my opinion, I think maybe kind of has suffered a little bit from, scheme issues and some of just the overall issues that we've been seeing coming out of Carolina over the last, handful of years. It feels like just turnover after turnover after turnover. And I just mean in terms of coaching staff and who's in charge and what's going on over there in Carolina. The situation's not great. I do think coming into a situation now that is hopefully finding its footing, coming out of its own dark times type of situation here. I mean, this is a guy that was a defensive rookie defensive rookie of the year, back in 2020. I think he presents someone who on a low deal could bring you a lot of upside and surprise at the safety position. And then they went and fortified the offensive line as well. You go and get Tyler Biadasz, who on a 3-year, $30 million deal, $10 million per year, someone who, according to PFF, and you take that with what you will, has credited him for only 3 sacks in the last 3 seasons. All 3 of those sacks coming back in the 2023 year. But the 2 years prior, he wasn't credited for a single sack. And when you're looking at a team like the Washington Commanders, who what were they, either 1 or 2? I can't remember. I confused them and the Giants because they were the 1 and 2 teams as far as sacks allowed. I believe they were second behind the Giants, or it's the other way around. One of those two, but both the teams, ungodly amount of sacks allowed. To get a guy like Tyler to come in here and fortify that center position for you, fantastic. Excellent job. And again, none of these contracts ungodly amounts. So excellent job by the Commanders here, not overspending, but clearly trying to fill out a roster that I think had a lot of holes coming into this offseason. Next, we'll focus on a single person again here, and I'm looking at running back Saquon Barkley, who is now joining the Eagles. Now, you could probably argue that this is a win for Philly as well, but I really look at this as a win for Saquon Barkley, all things considered, with the just kind of situation that his career has gone through in New York. He has not had a truly threatening passing attack to help him out since basically his rookie season in 2018 when Eli Manning was still leading the way. And even then, that was Eli Manning at the tail end of his career. But he goes and signs a big money contract, 3 years, nearly $38 million. And you go somewhere that can now maximize the talents of Saquon Barkley because he steps into an offense that isn't going to require him to be the guy every single down. And on top of that, defenses can't go into the week's game plan and go, all right, we're facing Saquon Barkley and a bunch of other guys. Let's make sure we stack the box and we know where Saquon Barkley is at all times, because now they have to respect Jalen Hurts. You have a stout offensive line as well working in front of them, as we've seen from the last few years. On top of that, a receiving core that consists of A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and Dallas Goedert here. All of these guys are taken into account. And in theory, it should be opening things up for Saquon Barkley. Now, Philadelphia has run a bit of a committee backfield as of late. I know depending on, who had the hot hand really is kind of how it felt going. But when you look at the contract that they have there now, you're probably looking at Saquon Barkley as your lead back, and he's probably going to be expected to be that lead running back for you. However, I do think you have a really good opportunity for him to flourish in this offense, not being the sole fear of opposing defenses. And I know injuries are a concern. You can't talk about Saquon Barkley without having some reservations about the injuries, and I get that. But when you put it into retrospect here, he played in 43 of a possible 51 games in the last 3 seasons, which has to do with his whole, little spat of injuries that he's been dealing with here. That's not bad by any means. You're available for 43 of 51 possible games. That's not bad by any means. That's pushing 90%. It's probably somewhere in the 80s. Off the top of my head, I can't do the math, but you're probably sitting somewhere within 80s, around that range. If at lowest it's 79%, I don't know. You math people can do that. But I mean, for someone that over the last 2 years has had 2,892 total yards and 20 touchdowns to boot on top of that, and he's pretty much been available barring one bad injury season, what was now 3 years ago at this point, going into this next season. He's no longer the focal point of the offense. Things should open up for him. He got a fat contract. He's a winner in my books this free agency. Next, I kind of have a player/team kind of winner scenario here, as I think both sides obviously end up winning out on this one here, and that is going to be both the Pittsburgh Steelers and quarterback Russell Wilson as a whole. The Steelers have put all their chips on the table for next season with this signing, in my opinion. They are banking on Russell Wilson not being the problem over there in Denver, and it just being a poor marriage between Russell Wilson and Sean Payton, and obviously the season prior just being the Nathaniel Hackett debacle. Russell Wilson does present a bit of an admission on Pittsburgh's part, in my opinion. I could be wrong on this, but in my opinion, that Kenny Pickett is not going to be the long-term answer for them. Otherwise, I don't think you're bringing in Russell Wilson. I know the deal is for only $1.2 million, so why not bring him in if you can afford that, which pretty much everyone in the NFL can, but it's clear that Russell Wilson saw the situation for what it is, and clearly the Steelers see the situation for what it is as well. This presents a legit starting opportunity for Russell Wilson to work with a team that has a lot of skill, talent, an offensive line trending in the right direction, and a defense that has been very good the last couple of years that, with some help from a competent offense, could honestly be even better because they're not on the field as often here. But, I mean, I look at what Russell Wilson did last season. Yeah, 3,000 yards isn't necessarily anything to write home about in today's day of the NFL, but a 66.5% completion percentage with 26 touchdowns to 8 interceptions. I mean, that's a solid touchdown to interception ratio if you ask me. And I do honestly think that there is a good possibility that we see Russell Wilson in this system here shine a little bit more than we even saw from him last year. And all things considered, for him to have the season he had with the mess that was he and Sean Payton over there in Denver, I think says a lot about the ability that Russell Wilson still has left in the tank. And I'm someone who, even for a little bit was kind of unsure of where the career of Russell Wilson was going following the Nathaniel Hackett season. So, I'm not sitting here saying that I've been a diehard supporter of Russell Wilson over the last couple of years by any means, but I do think based off what I saw and all things considered with that situation there, it could get even better going into this next season here. And I mean, again, offensive line for Pittsburgh showed some improvement this past season. You've got a running game that features both Najee Harris and Jalen Warren, who I think both have some great strengths in their own right. George Pickens is your number one wide receiver. And while I was a little bit caught off by the Deontay Johnson trade, I'm assuming they're probably going to go either find someone to replace him through free agency, or maybe there's someone in the draft they really, really like that they think they have the opportunity to go and grab. So I wouldn't be too surprised there. But then on the defensive side, I really love the all-in feel that we're getting from Pittsburgh here, because when I think of the Steelers, I think of great defenses. And when I think of great defenses, I also think of how Russell Wilson won his Super Bowl and nearly won 2 Super Bowls with the Legion of Boom way back when. So you see them go and add Patrick Queen, all in on the linebacker position here. You go and get a guy like Dante Jackson, who's been excellent over there in, I almost said Philadelphia, Carolina for the Panthers. It's clear that they know what you need to do to help Russell Wilson get back to that dance, and it's behind excellent defense, a sound running game, some talented players around him offensively, and Russell Wilson can do a good job of protecting the football. There is a lot that looks really good here mixing together in Pittsburgh, and I'm excited to see it, hence why I have them as a winner altogether, both he himself, Russell Wilson, and the Steelers as a whole. Next, I'm looking at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers / Baker Mayfield here because, yes, I think both sides win on this one as well. Baker Mayfield obviously finding his home for the foreseeable future, getting himself a nice 3-year, $100 million deal that honestly poses as a phenomenal bargain for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers if everything goes according to plan. Obviously, if everything goes according to plan here. But I do think that this does a lot for Tampa Bay because now you don't have to, at least for now, the assumption is Baker Mayfield is your guy going forward. You don't hand him that much money if you don't think that your offense can't grow even further with him at the quarterback position here. And then when you look outside of Baker Mayfield, beyond just the signing there, what Tampa Bay has done in terms of player retention has been fantastic and a little bit unexpected in my opinion. Levante David is back on a 1-year deal that could be worth up to $10 million. Not bad at all for somebody who's still ripping through tackles every single season here. Mike Evans re-signs on a massive 2-year deal. Pretty much the entirety of it, except for like $6 million, is guaranteed. $41 million altogether. Jordan Whitehead's back on a 2-year deal. Antoine Winfield Jr. is tagged, and I'm going to assume is going to either sign some long-term extension or even play on the tag this next year. But I'm assuming that works itself out as well. A lot of Tampa Bay has focused on just retention and allowing us to continue to grow as a team with, again, a unit that I think offensively, if they get a little bit better and if this team has more time together, can push itself even further. I'm excited to see what they do defensively. Cornerback is a big need for them, but beyond that, being able to keep everyone that they did, again, was kind of unexpected in my opinion. I don't think a lot of people really pegged them to be able to bring back David, Evans, and Jordan Whitehead and Antoine Winfield Jr. Like, these are all guys that people were anticipating a fair amount of money we're going to go to no matter where they went. And for them to be able to reel them all back in, yeah, is it a run it back type of feel? Maybe. There are some upgrades that are necessary, but they kept all the really good talent that I think was worth running it back with. So if they can just add on the core that they had last season, I think they can be very competitive in what is a, very up in the air NFC South, like I said with the Atlanta Falcons earlier. Then we switch gears back to a singular player here, and I'm looking at running back Derrick Henry, who is now heading to the Baltimore Ravens. So with this one here, you could obviously argue Ravens win big as well. They get themselves King Henry to load up the backfield for them. But for me personally, I really, really like this one for Derrick Henry more than anything else. First, Derrick Henry gets paid, honestly, a little bit less than I was expecting him to get, but he is getting older at this point here, but he's still a dominant running back, and his style, I think, can translate to him playing a little bit longer than maybe some people expected. Secondly, he finds himself in the best possible position to fight for a championship in the AFC. I think if there was anyone that you could go to contender-wise that you're going to pick to try to run and go after a championship with, it's going to be the Baltimore Ravens. They are probably the closest thing you can get to a legitimate contender against the Kansas City Chiefs in the AFC. And then third, The Ravens also love to run the football, and they are going to absolutely utilize Derrick Henry to the best of their ability. I would be shocked if they don't. However, the reason I don't think that this is an overall win for the Ravens is because they have lost some pieces through this free agency, and on top of that, I do have some concerns. There's a lot of retooling that's going to have to go on over the next few days here. So again, while you could argue, yes, it's massive that the Ravens picked up Derrick Henry, there are still some things that they need to work on before I can consider them winners of this current free agent cycle. And that's why I have specifically Derrick Henry highlighted, because I think he went into the best possible situation here. We need to see them retool the offensive line, as we've seen two starters now in John Simpson and Morgan Moses both go to the New York Jets. The wide receiver room, a little bit up in the air now with the Odell Beckham situation. Do they opt to bring him back? Do they opt not to bring him back? Do they go for somebody else? And for a while, I was kind of pounding the table for Calvin Ridley to go to Baltimore, but he's now off to somewhere else. We'll talk about that in a second as well. So I'm curious to see what they do there. If they can bring Odell back, if he's willing to take less money to come back in Baltimore, because I would say that they didn't quite get the production they were expecting to get out of him when they handed him a pretty fat contract last year. So there are some things that the Ravens do need to work on here, but I do love the marriage of Derrick Henry to Baltimore. Big fan of that. So excited for Derrick Henry. And honestly, and I've seen a lot of people say this, he looks good in Baltimore's uniform. Absolutely fits the bill. Next, and my last highlight here, a big winner of this one, and it's up to him to take advantage of this, and I just kind of referenced it a second ago here. I'm talking specifically to quarterback Will Levis and his Tennessee Titans team that is basically doing everything in their power to set him up to be successful. So Will Levis here, in my opinion, is a winner in free agency. It is now up to him to take advantage of this winning ticket that the Titans are trying to hand to him and run with it. I will say this. I don't know what the Titans are going to look like next year. There's a lot of changes going on over there, some more unexpected than others, like the Mike Vrabel firing, but now we're looking at Callahan and what he could potentially do over there. However, it's clear to me that the Tennessee Titans absolutely want to succeed with Will Levis. You look at retaining DeAndre Hopkins early as a kind of this was like a heads up early sign as to the direction that they were going in. Because in my opinion, I was kind of expecting them to let D-Hop go because I figured maybe he would want to go and play for a contender somewhere. And on top of that, as an aging wide receiver, that is also something you have to consider for the amount of money he's making. However, rather than letting him go, they retain him. So early sign that they want to see Will Levis succeed keeping a guy like him around. Then on top of that, you go into free agency. You sign Tony Pollard, who's been a very effective running back for the Dallas Cowboys. You also go and get someone like Calvin Ridley, who is arguably one of the prettiest route runners in the NFL. And so now you're putting together these pieces, adding some juice to an offense that was losing Derrick Henry. And, okay, it's clear the Titans want to see, and I know they just went and signed Kevin Rudolph. Or is it not Kevin Rudolph? Mason Rudolph. Kevin Rudolph, he's like a guy from, isn't he a singer or something like that? I don't know. He made music, Let It Rock, right? Kevin Rudolph, isn't that what that is? Mason Rudolph. I know they went and signed Mason Rudolph. However, he is definitely like a backup contingency if all else fails. We have a guy who clearly did a good job for the Steelers in a short stretch last season. So that's kind of how I look at that. I would be shocked if they're bringing in Mason Rudolph to take the starting job over Will Levis here. It firmly looks like we're building around Will Levis in Tennessee. On top of that, the Tennessee Titans offensive line clearly needs some upgrading, and I think that's something that I've heard the Tennessee Titans talk about the most. This is not the smash mouth badass offensive line we've seen from Tennessee in years past, at least for what feels like the last decade or so. And they went and got themselves a center in Lloyd Cushenberry, 4-year, $50 million deal. Clearly they need some more work, but this is, again, another step in the right direction of a big area of need for the Tennessee Titans. So it's very clear to me they want to succeed with Will Levis. You go and get a new running back, one that's been fairly productive. You go and get yourself a good wide receiver, potentially even great wide receiver. He hit 1,000 yards this past season, so I would argue great wide receiver and someone who can run routes with the best of them. And you still have DeAndre Hopkins there. This Titans offense looks like it has more juice in the tank than it did last season, so I'm excited to see what Will Levis can do with this, because if he can put it all together, you have a pretty talented group of guys to look at. But again, there is some more work that needs to be done, hence why I have Will Levis marked off here and not the Tennessee Titans as winners of free agency. But those are some people I wanted to highlight. We've still got plenty of time with free agency to go. I invite you all to comment down below who are you looking at as winners right now? If you end up seeing this a few days from now, who do you think is winning free agency at this point here? Obviously, I'm doing this way too early, but I wanted to get in and have this discussion with you all and see what you all had to say. So let me know in that comment section down below. But as always, if you made it to the very end, I greatly appreciate it, and I will see you all next time. Have a good one.